How do you handle childcare in Mexico without getting a nanny? Elephant in the room question. Why am I not talking about getting a nanny? There's going to be a gap. There's going to be a gap between the day you arrive and the day you find a nanny or a full-time babysitter that you actually like. And I've been a single mom since Alex was 2, so I remember those gap moments. Those are the worst. You will eventually find your amazing, perfect nanny, your full-time babysitter, all of that jazz, but it's unlikely that it's gonna happen on your first try. I mean, even in the US, I had to go through multiple stages of figuring out who was best, and you'll be doing the same here, so definitely stay patient in your search. But in the meantime, these are things that's going to help. Don't discount restaurants in general. I work here, I just put my stuff away, and then Alex is probably watching Netflix.
Yes, I am.
Watching Netflix, and then he can pretty much order whatever he wants off the menu. How was it hanging out here while I was doing my Zoom call?
Great.
What did you like about it?
Walls.
Walls. And he's referring to these walls. They let us draw on the walls, which is super cool. Unlike the US, generally speaking, restaurants really don't mind if you spend a half day or even a full day there, so long as you do occasionally order at least something. And so if you find a place with good internet, a restaurant could work as well. Obviously, there might be some locations where maybe hanging out for hours and hours isn't quite as encouraged. So again, a little bit of trial and error, but even better, there are so many restaurants in Mexico that really cater to little kids. Restaurants with play areas, some of which, a lot of which, actually have an attendant that will also take care of your kid, like literally eyes on your kid while you work, well, while you eat. Sometimes the places that have actual people watching your child, it comes with the services of the restaurant. Other times you do have to pay an hourly fee. I've seen as low as 35 pesos an hour and as high as 70. But the places that charge usually have really nice playgrounds for the kids. Now again, there's still gonna be a lot of trial and error because some of these places will not have great internet, while others are gonna have too much music for you to necessarily be able to concentrate on working. I have yet to find a cure for noise reduction here in Mexico, but if it's just an internet issue, remember you can always use your phone as a hotspot. Although obviously, buy more data, it'll probably eat it pretty quickly. If you've got a child who's able to kind of entertain themselves electronically or via drawing, etc., and is not too loud, they'll probably fit in a co-working space. Some places are more comfy than others, so again, there'll be some trial and error figuring out which ones work best, but especially if you need really good internet, do not count co-working spaces out. Antisocial play dates. I know. The purpose of a play date is obviously to play, it's obviously to be social, but I think we can all agree we're really doing it for the kids, right? So if you don't necessarily want to be social during a play date, then don't. Say hello, introduce yourself, you know, this is my kid, etc. And then just say, hey, I've got a little bit of work to do, so I'm gonna be sitting over here and getting some work done. It's like shaking hands and kissing babies. At least the people at the play date will know who the child belongs to and who to call if anything happens. And I'm being serious on this. In Merida as well as here, our play dates can go on for hours and hours. So I fully understand if socializing for that long is just too much, and antisocial behavior is something I fully understand. Introverts unite. That being said, I would probably draw the line at just dropping off your kid. Although if you've got a close friend there that you think of as a babysitter, then feel free to do that. And speaking of friends, especially friends with kids, one of the huge benefits of joining expat communities is literally meeting other people, meeting other parents, meeting others who might have time and might enjoy helping you out with your child. Some people will do this as a paid service, some people will do this just because they don't mind watching your kid. But getting to know people, always a benefit, especially in a new country. You could also reverse that and volunteer to babysit someone else's kid. I know, I get it. Here we are looking for somebody to watch our kid and we're gonna volunteer to watch somebody else's kid. That seems like an oxymoron, but hear me out. This is something I actually started to do when I first moved to Florida. I really didn't know that many people, but I did have a friend with 2 boys, one who was a little older than Alex, one who was a little younger. And when I found out that she occasionally had trouble finding a reliable sitter, I let her know, hey, put me as one of your backups. And I did it for free, which she at first thought was kind of crazy, but hear me out. I am the mother of an only child, and there are moments where he just needs somebody to talk to, and some of those moments, I would rather it not be me. I know it sounds cruel, but it is the way it is. Sometimes moms just need me time, and if you can find the right friends for your kid, those friends that you're babysitting can actually be the babysitter of your kid. Now, I'm being 100% serious. It's something that I still occasionally do when I find the right person. It's not necessarily an easy thing to do, but especially when Alex was little, if I can find somebody that played nicely with him, that entertained him, / that he entertained as well, it was like a match made in heaven. I would do all of my, online business stuff that I was trying to start, and Alex would have a friend to play with. I just had to make sure that they were okay, which is pretty easy to do in the comfort of my own home. I would say a common theme in Mexico living is trial and error, trial and error, trial and error. Let's talk about some of the difficulties you're gonna find in hiring childcare here in Mexico. And I've noticed that a lot of people sometimes just default and get a foreign sitter as opposed to a local. They get somebody who's English speaking, which just makes so much sense. But the two main difficulties you're gonna find with hiring somebody who is not local is that a traveler's gotta travel. Often the people you find are not necessarily planning on being here forever. And so you might find that your American babysitter goes back to the States and or wants to travel other parts of Mexico, and so they inevitably leave, which brings you back to ground zero. The other thing, of course, is that especially if you want somebody English speaking, if you want somebody who's a US citizen, Canadian, etc., they're probably going to charge more than what a local will do. So to a certain extent, the most reliable is probably going to be a local who, yes, probably does not speak English or understand necessarily all the customs that we have in the US. And while I've never hired a nanny or a babysitter here in Mexico, I will say some of the common complaints I hear are things like, she's letting my kid go wild. She's letting my kid do whatever my kid wants to do, leaving a mess in the house, never cleaning up after themselves. Or some find that their nanny is way too strict, not letting their kid play to their full extent, expecting the child to clean up after themselves a little too much, etc. So you find like this huge range of complaints. And I'll tell you that the number one reason is because we, especially again, if we haven't hired a full-time nanny before, we aren't necessarily always the best at explaining what our expectations are, and we're not the best at learning how to kind of tweak an action little by little. Being proactive is really important as the parent hiring a nanny. You have to take time to observe how the babysitter or nanny acts around your kid, how your child acts around the nanny, and there's going to be a lot of time involved in kind of tweaking a relationship and making it perfect. It's really similar to what you have to do in the US, but again, in the US, you don't necessarily have the difficulty of figuring out the language and the culture as you're doing it. So it is sometimes a very time-consuming and frustrating part of expat life is finding the caretaker and then also training them to be best suited for your family. And so it might take more than one nanny to find the perfect one. And speaking of learning how to interact with your childcare provider, your kid also has to learn how to interact with them as well. Now, again, I have not myself hired a nanny, but I do have a housekeeper. And let me tell you, Alex didn't really know what to do with having a housekeeper in our home, to the point of rudeness. It took me a while to have to explain to my fully grown, at the time, 11-year-old child, he has to say hello when somebody enters our home, he has to say goodbye, he has to ask people how they're doing, he needs to be observant of her actions so that when she's coming closer to where he's at, if she's cleaning the floor, for example, he needs to move out of the way so she can clean even under where he's sitting, and just to have like an awareness that there is another person in the house, and extra courtesies are absolutely required and expected. Otherwise, mom's about to embarrass him in front of a stranger. You don't want that. I will say at the end of the day, just remember that the person you're hiring is a person, probably does have a desire to help your family, and their desire is never to kind of ruin your life. but they're also not psychic and they can't figure things out without your help. And so it is a time-consuming kind of process. You will have to inevitably hang out yourself with the babysitter just to make sure that everything kind of goes a little more smoothly. Some tips in terms of once you hire a nanny is understand that they also need breaks during the day. Ideally, this would happen while your child is napping, but if your child is too old to nap or is not napping for very long, somewhere in the middle of a full day, they're expected to have an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours of time to themselves. And know that generally speaking, you are responsible for making sure the nanny is fed and has their basic needs met while they are with you. This is even if it's not a live-in nanny. And obviously, anytime you go out somewhere, you would be expected to take care of all the needs of the caretaker. Again, making sure that you're paying for the tickets, paying for the meals if you're eating out, and all of that jazz. When you go to a play date, yes, this has happened before where somebody has brought a nanny to a play date. Please introduce us to your nanny. Let us know, hey, this is my nanny. Her name is. And if your child is sitting, I would expect the caretaker to also sit. You basically would treat them as you would a friend who, yes, when your child is having issues, you would probably expect them to be the first response, but nonetheless, they're still a guest at the play date and you would treat them as such, as well as expect us to treat your nanny as a guest. And kind of related, keep in mind that there is a high chance you're going to be responsible for transportation for a full-time nanny. So again, taking on a nanny is kind of a really big deal. And on top of all of that, on top of the finding a personality that works really well with your family and making sure that your kid is good with the nanny, comes all the legal side of the house. Now that's a huge side, but please keep in mind that you're responsible for a full-time nanny, for paying for holidays off, which can sometimes be triple the pay depending on the circumstance. You're responsible for aguinaldo, which is an extra Christmas pay. It's not a bonus, it is mandatory, as well as, of course, perhaps severance pay whenever the relationship ends. Sometimes I wonder why there's not more videos on how to hire a nanny in Mexico, because so many people with really young children want to do it, and it's because of this. It is because it is in fact much more difficult than it might first appear. It's not so difficult that you can't do it. It's not so difficult that you should be scared of it necessarily, but just keep in mind, you're adding a person to your village, you're adding somebody who's gonna help you with your child. This is not something that's so easy that, day one, it's gonna be perfect and there's gonna be no effort on your part from that point on. No, unfortunately, training always has to happen because your family is very special, very unique, and a caretaker is not going to be psychic enough to know all of your needs without you having to explain it, even through the language and culture barriers. So I'm going to refer you to this video where we talk about the legal side of the house when it comes to hiring a housekeeper, but honestly, the same rules apply for a full-time nanny, so really important to know.